In this lesson, we will explain the structure of the hydrogen atom. We will work through several practice problems so you can feel more confident when answering questions on this topic. At the end, we will complete an MCAT-style passage together. So let's get started. Hydrogen makes up about 75% of all the normal matter in the universe. The stars, including our sun, are composed mostly of hydrogen undergoing nuclear fusion, which powers the universe and produces many of the heavier elements. From the basic matter around us to the stars above us to topics like organic chemistry, biology, biochemistry, and the general chemistry on the MCAT, the hydrogen atom surrounds us everywhere. Because of that, it's important to have a solid understanding of the hydrogen atom and how it behaves. So let's explore the hydrogen atom. On this slide, we're going to learn about the structure of the hydrogen atom. In nature, hydrogen exists in three isotopes. The most abundant is protium, which has one proton and zero neutrons in its nucleus. An isotope is a form of an element that has the same number of protons or the atomic number, but a different number of neutrons. Remember, the number of protons is what identifies an element. So all isotopes of hydrogen always have one proton. What changes among the isotopes is the number of neutrons. So, returning to our hydrogen atom, protium, the most abundant hydrogen isotope, contains one proton and no neutrons in its nucleus. As you can see from the picture on this slide, the nucleus of a hydrogen atom consists of a single positively charged proton, zero neutrons, and one electron orbits around this nucleus. Electrons don't just move randomly around the nucleus. They stay in a specific region called energy level or orbitals. These energy levels are quantized, which means electrons can only be in certain allowed energy levels or orbitals. They cannot exist in between energy levels. Each energy level is labeled with whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, and so on. There are no fractional levels like 1.5 or 2.5. Electrons must be in one energy level or another. Here's something interesting. Electrons can jump from one energy level to another, but only under specific conditions. An electron must either absorb a precise amount of energy to move to a higher energy level or release a precise amount of energy to drop down to a lower level. After the transition, the electron still orbits the nucleus in a circular path, but now it occupies a different energy level. Let's look at each case so we can better visualize what's happening. In the picture on this slide, you can clearly see the transition of a single electron in the hydrogen atom from n equals 1 to n equals 2. The single proton is located in the nucleus at the center of the hydrogen atom, and there are two energy levels surrounding the nucleus. One of them is n equals 1, and the other one is n equals 2. The electron has gained the precise amount of energy needed to jump from n equals 1 to n equals 2. The hydrogen atom on the left is in the ground state because its electron is at the lowest and most stable energy level, or n equals 1. The hydrogen atom on the right is in an excited energy level or excited state because its electron is now located at n equals 2. When an electron absorbs enough energy, it can move from a lower energy level called the ground state, or n equals 1 in this case, to a higher energy level known as the excited state, or n equals 2 or higher. Here's a key point. The electron must absorb exactly the right amount of energy, not more and not less, to match the energy gap between the two energy levels. This process is called electronic excitation. Let's introduce the exact opposite of electronic excitation. On this slide, we're looking at the opposite process, electronic relaxation. Here's what happens. When an electron releases the exact amount of energy it previously absorbed, it drops from a higher energy level or its excited state back down to a lower energy level or its relaxed state, such as from n equals 2 to n equals 1. The hydrogen atom on the left is in an excited state because its electron is located at n equals 2. The hydrogen atom on the right is in a relaxed state because the electron has transitioned back to n equals 1, which is the ground state and the most stable energy level for this electron. The energy released during this drop is equal to the energy difference between the two energy levels. Here's a quick important note. An electron in its ground state is at the lowest and most stable energy level possible. This could be n equals 1 or other energy levels depending on the electron and the atom. The electrons of different atoms have different ground state energy levels. In the case of this hydrogen atom, the electron is in the ground state when it is at n equals 1. Here's a key important point. An electron in its relaxed state is an electron that has released or emitted energy. The relaxed state may be the ground state, but it can also be another lower energy level, depending on the situation. On the other hand, an electron in an excited state is at a higher energy level after absorbing energy. The excited state can differ depending on the atom, but in our hydrogen atom example, the excited state in this situation is n equals 2. Now, here's the interesting part. When the electron drops down, the energy it releases comes out as electromagnetic radiation. The energy has a specific frequency and wavelength, and each wavelength corresponds to a different region of the electromagnetic spectrum. If the wavelength appears to fall within the visible light range, we actually see it as a specific color. When an electron drops from a higher energy level to a lower one, the light it emits can show up as a visible color, which corresponds to a certain region of the visible light region of the electromagnetic spectrum. Before I introduce the electromagnetic spectrum to you, let's review a few formulas so we can better understand the order of the electromagnetic spectrum. Let's talk about the formulas for the energy that's given off or absorbed when an electron makes transitions between different energy levels. That energy has its own frequency and wavelength. Importantly, the energy released during this fall is exactly equal to the energy that was absorbed when the electron jumped up to a higher energy level. So to figure out the energy of that photon, we use the first equation listed for number 1. This equation is E is equal to H times V or nu. E is the energy of the photon measured in joules. H is Planck's constant, which equals 6.626 times 10 to the negative 34 joules times second. V or nu is the frequency measured in hertz. Another unit for hertz is 1 over second. Nu can also be represented as frequency or F. They are both the same. Pay attention to units here. Planck's constant has units of joules second or joules times seconds, and the frequency has units of 1 over seconds. When you multiply the units of frequency and the units of Planck's constant, the seconds cancel out, leaving only the unit of joules, which matches the unit of energy on the left side. The MCAT loves to test units. If you can track the units for some important formulas like the ones that you see in front of you, you can often solve the problems even without full formulas. So back to the equations. Because energy and frequency are directly proportional, as you can see from the formula presented in number 1, a high energy photon has a high frequency, and a low energy photon has a low frequency. We can also relate this to the wavelength of the photon using another key equation, or the equation listed for number 2, which equals C is equal to V or nu times lambda or wavelength. C is the speed of light, which equals 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. V or nu is frequency measured in hertz or 1 over second. Lambda is the wavelength measured in meters or nanometers. If we rearrange this equation, we get the equation listed for number 3, which is equal to V is equal to C divided by lambda. This tells us that frequency and wavelength are inversely proportional. A high frequency photon leads to a shorter wavelength, and a low frequency leads to a longer wavelength. These two equations listed in number 1 or number 2 are the E equals h times nu and the C is equal to nu times wavelength are extremely important for the MCAT. So make sure you're comfortable using both of them. When we combine the two equations, we get another equation listed in number 4. We can relate energy directly to wavelength. If we substitute frequency or the equation nu is equal to c, the speed of light divided by wavelength, into the first equation, we get E is equal to h times c divided by lambda. This shows that energy is inversely proportional to wavelength. So a high energy photon has a short wavelength and a low energy photon has a long wavelength. The two most important equations that you should definitely commit to memory are the first two equations, the ones listed in number 1 and number 2. You can easily derive the other two equations in number 3 and 4 if you know the first two equations. Now, let's connect everything we've learned and learn more about the electromagnetic spectrum. So, what is the electromagnetic spectrum? When an electron falls from a higher energy level down to a lower one, it releases a photon. That photon has a specific energy, it has a specific frequency and wavelength. If that wavelength happens to fall within the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, we can actually see the light that's emitted. So when the electron drops down, the color you see corresponds to the exact frequency and wavelength of the photon released. Here's a diagram of the electromagnetic spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum includes every type of light from low energy radio waves all the way to high energy gamma rays. Visible light makes up only a tiny slice of the entire spectrum, ranging from red with low energy, low frequency, long wavelength, to violet light with high energy, high frequency, and short wavelength. To understand the spectrum, you need to know how energy, frequency, and wavelength relate to one another. But you don't need to memorize exact numbers for the MCAT. The exam will usually give you the wavelength and frequencies that you will need. What is important to remember is the order of the electromagnetic spectrum. A great mnemonic to remember the order is real men invent very unusual X-ray gadgets. The R stands for radio waves, the M stands for microwaves, I stands for infrared, V stands for visible, U stands for ultraviolet, X stands for X-rays, and G stands for gamma rays. This order goes from low energy with low frequency and long wavelength to high energy with high frequency and shorter wavelength. For the visible light region of the spectrum, you need to remember that red has a longer wavelength, around 700 nanometers, and violet has a shorter wavelength of about 400 nanometers. So, to summarize, remember these two key relationships. Low energy leads to low frequency and high wavelength. High energy leads to high frequency and low wavelength. Energy and frequency are directly proportional, while energy is indirectly proportional to wavelength. Now, here's something very important. When an electron transitions between energy levels, the energy gaps between these levels are not equal. The difference in energy gets smaller the further you move from the nucleus. The larger energy jump is always between n equals 1 and n equals 2. You can clearly see this in the energy diagram shown here on this slide. The spacing between n equals 1 and n equals 2 is wide. But as you move to higher levels, n equals 3, n equals 4, or n equals 5, the gaps get closer and closer together. This idea is extremely important for the MCAT because it helps you predict how much energy an electron needs to absorb or release, and it gives you insight into how electrons behave inside the atom. This brings us directly to the next topic, the hydrogen spectrum series. When an electron in the hydrogen atom drops from a higher energy level to a lower one, it releases energy in the form of light. The electron can only fall along specific steps or energy levels because, as we stated before, energy levels are quantized. Each step produces a photon with a specific energy, and that energy determines the color or type of light we see. This creates what's known as the hydrogen emission spectrum. The hydrogen spectrum is divided into several series, depending on where the electron lands. If the electron falls all the way down to the first energy level, or n equals 1, the photons produced have very high energy. As we saw in the previous slide, the difference in energy between n equals 1 and n equals 2 is the highest. The drop from any higher energy level down to n equals 1 belongs to the Lyman series, which appears in the ultraviolet region. It releases the most energy, and this is the reason why it appears in the UV region. If the electron drops from any of the higher energy levels down to n equals 2, the energy releases is medium. This transition forms the Balmer series, the only series we can actually see with the naked eye. This is part of the spectrum responsible for the visible colors of the light. If the electron falls from any of the higher energy levels down to n equals 3, the energy released is even smaller. These photons form the Paschen series, which shows up in the infrared region. The Lyman, the Balmer, and the Paschen series are important topics to know for the MCAT. The key idea is that the biggest energy drops create high energy photons like the ultraviolet light, which is associated with the Lyman series. And the medium energy drops create low energy light like visible light, which belongs to the Balmer series. The smaller energy drop is associated with the Paschen series, which shows up in the infrared region. These series are like the fingerprints of hydrogen, and they help scientists understand stars, galaxies, and the structure of atoms themselves. On this slide, we're going to learn about an equation that relates electronic transition to the amount of energy in the photon of light we observe from them. This equation is called the Rydberg equation, and it's used to calculate the energy of the light that is observed or emitted when an electron in a hydrogen atom changes energy levels. The equation is E equals negative R times H times the quantity of 1 over n final squared minus 1 over n initial squared. E is the energy in unit joules. Bar H is the Rydberg constant for hydrogen, and it equals negative 2.178 times 10 to the minus 18 joules. The n value represents the electron's energy levels. N final is the final energy level the electron ends in, and N initial is the initial energy level the electron starts in. Pay attention to the units. The only unit is the unit joules, and it is presented as the unit of Rydberg's constant. The n final and n initial do not have any units, so the only unit value in this equation is the unit of joules, and this corresponds to the unit of energy. When an electron drops from a higher energy level to a lower one, the atom releases energy in the form of a photon. This is called emission. In that case, the energy comes out as a negative value because energy is leaving the atom. When an electron absorbs energy and moves from a lower level to a higher one, the atom takes in energy. That's called absorption, and the energy has a positive sign because the atom is gaining energy from the outside. This equation tells us exactly how much energy is involved in an electron transition. Big jumps between energy levels release high energy light, like the ultraviolet, while smaller jumps release lower energy light, like visible or infrared. Once we have a value for energy in joules, we can easily calculate the frequency and wavelength associated with that specific energy using the two equations presented earlier in this lesson. So the Rydberg equation connects electron movements inside the atom to the light we observe from them. Just as an important note, the Rydberg's equation is used for hydrogen and hydrogen-like atoms with only a single electron. In this lesson, we covered a lot of new information. If you feel the need to pause this video to review any concepts, now is a good time. We're going to go over a few practice problems to grasp a better general understanding of the hydrogen atom and its behavior. As always, read each question fully. Pause this video and work on the questions on your own before seeing the solutions to the problems. Let's begin. Here's question number 1. It reads, how much energy is released when an electron falls from the n equals 7 to the n equals 2 energy level in a hydrogen atom? What is the wavelength of the emitted light, and which hydrogen spectral series does this transition belong to? Take a minute to solve this problem and then come back and see the solution. Let's solve this hydrogen atom problem step by step. We are asked to find the energy released, the wavelength of the emitted light, and the hydrogen spectrum series when an electron drops from n equals 7 to n equals 2. First, we need to use the Rydberg's equation, which is delta E equals negative 2.178 times 10 to the negative 18 joules, multiplied by 1 over n final squared minus 1 over n initial squared. Now we need to plug in all the values into the equation. N final equals 2 and n initial equals 7. So we get delta E equals negative 2.178 times 10 to the negative 18 times 1 over 2 squared minus 1 over 7 squared. That becomes 1 over 4 minus 1 over 49. 1 over 4 is 0.25 and 1 over 49 is approximately 0.02041. Subtracting these values gives 0.25 minus 0.02041. That equals 0.22959. Now multiplying the two numbers, we get delta E equals negative 2.178 times 10 to the negative 18 times 0.22959. This gives delta E equals approximately negative 5 times 10 to the negative 19 joules. The negative sign tells us energy is being released, so the energy of the photon is 5 times 10 to the negative 19 joules. Next, we need to find the wavelength using the equation. Wavelength equals h times c divided by E. Remember the equation E is equal to h times c divided by wavelength that we listed under number 4 for the formulas for energy slide? This is the equation we get when we rearrange that equation. So we get the equation lambda is equal to h times c divided by E. When we plug in the constant, h equals 6.626 times 10 to the negative 34 joules times seconds, and c is equal to 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. So h times c is equal to 1.9878 times 10 to the negative 25 joules times meters. Now divide by the energy, we get wavelength equals 1.9878 times 10 to the negative 25 divided by 5 times 10 to the negative 19. This gives a wavelength of approximately 3.98 times 10 to the negative 7 meters, or 398 nanometers. Finally, because the electron falls to the n equals 2 energy level, this transition belongs to the Balmer series, which lies in the visible region of the electromagnetic spectrum. Let's move on to question number 2. Here's question number 2. It reads, how much energy is absorbed when an electron in a hydrogen atom moves from n equals 3 to n equals 5? What are the frequency and wavelength? Here's the solution to number 2. Let's walk through how to solve this problem step by step. We're looking at an electron in a hydrogen atom that moves from n equals 3 to n equals 5. Since the electron is moving to a higher energy level, this is absorption process, meaning energy is being absorbed. So we should expect a positive value for energy. First, we calculate the energy using the Rydberg's equation, which is E equals negative 2.178 times 10 to the minus 18 joules, multiplied by the quantity of 1 over n final squared minus 1 over n initial squared. Here, n final is 5 and n initial is 3. So we plug in the numbers. 1 over 5 squared is 1 over 25, and 1 over 3 squared is 1 over 9. That gives us E equals negative 2.178 times 10 to the minus 18 multiplied by 1 over 25 minus 1 over 9. 1 over 25 equals 0.04 and 1 over 9 equals 0.1111. When we calculate the difference, 0.04 and 0.1111, we get a negative value of negative 0.0711. The negative signs cancel, giving us a positive value for energy, which makes sense because energy is being absorbed. That gives us a final energy of about positive 1.55 times 10 to the minus 19 joules. Next, we find the wavelength using the equation lambda equals h times c divided by E. When we plug everything in and simplify, we get a wavelength of approximately 1.28 times 10 to minus 6 meters, which is about 1280 nanometers, or 1280 nanometers, placing it in the infrared region. We know this is the infrared region because the wavelength is larger than the wavelength of red light, which is about 700 nanometers. Finally, we calculate the frequency. We can use the equation E equals h times nu. When we rearrange this equation, we get nu equals E divided by h. We plug in the energy and the Planck's constant. That gives us a frequency of approximately 2.34 times 10 to the 14 hertz. So to summarize, the electron absorbs energy, which leads to positive value for energy. The energy absorbed is about positive 1.55 times 10 to the minus 19 joules. The wavelength is about 1.28 times 10 to the minus 6 meters, or 1,280 nanometers, and a frequency that's about 2.34 times 10 to the 14 hertz. Let's move on to question number 3. Here's question number 3. It says an electron in a hydrogen atom starts at n equals 1 and absorbs radiation with a frequency of 3.16 times 10 to the 15 hertz. To which energy level does this electron jump? Or what is the value of NF and final? Here's a solution to this problem. An electron in a hydrogen atom starts in the ground state at n equals 1, and it absorbs a radiation of light with a frequency of 3.16 times 10 to the power of 15 hertz. Our goal is to find a new energy level, also called N final. Here we are told that the electron absorbs a certain radiation frequency which has a corresponding energy, and since the electron absorbs the photon of energy, the unit of energy has to be positive. Let's go over the solution step by step. In the first step, we calculate the energy of the absorbed photon using the equation E equals h times nu, or frequency. We plug in Planck's constant, which is 6.626 times 10 to the minus 34 joules times seconds, and multiplying it by the frequency, 3.16 times 10 to the 15, this gives us an energy of approximately 2.09 times 10 to the minus 18 joules. Next, in the second step, we use the Rydberg's equation. So E equals negative 2.178 times 10 to minus 18 joules multiplied by the quantity 1 over n final 1 over n final squared minus 1 over n initial squared. We plug in our values and E becomes positive 2.09 times 10 to the minus 18. N initial is 1, so the equation becomes positive 2.09 times 10 to the minus 18 equals negative 2.178 times 10 to the minus 18 multiplied by the quantity 1 over n final squared minus 1. Now we divide both sides by negative 2.178 times 10 to the minus 18. This gives us negative 0.960 equals 1 over n final squared minus 1. In step number 3, we need to find the value of NF, n final. We do that by adding 1 to both sides. This gives 0.04 equals 1 over n final squared. Now we solve for NF by taking the reciprocal to get n final squared is equal to 1 divided by 0.04, which equals 25. Finally, we take the square root of both sides to get n final equals 5. So the electron absorbs that much energy or radiation to jump from n equals 1 up to n equals 5. Let's move on to question number 4. Question number 4 says, which of the following electronic transitions in a hydrogen atom releases the greatest amount of energy? Answer choice A says n equals 5 to n equals 3. Answer choice B says n equals 9 to n equals 2. Answer choice C says n equals 15 to n equals 4. Answer choice D says n equals 3 to n equals 1. Which one do you think is the correct answer? Here's the solution to this problem. If you picked answer choice D, you are correct. Let's see why. The key idea to remember is this. The more energy an electron loses, the more energy gets released as light. Energy gaps between energy levels are not equal. The gaps between energy levels are much larger the closer the energy levels are to the nucleus, and they get smaller as you move further away. Remember the energy level diagram shown before? Here's the energy level diagram as shown on a previous slide. Now let's look at the answer choices. Answer choice A said a transition from n equals 5 to n equals 3. This is a small drop because of the gap between n equals 5 and n equals 3. Answer choice B says the transition from n equals 9 to n equals 2. This is a bigger drop, but still it's not the biggest. In choice C, the electron drops from n equals 15 to n equals 4. These higher levels are closer together, so the energy drop is smaller. Answer choice D, the transition from n equals 3 to n equals 1. This is the biggest drop toward the ground state. Because the energy gap between n equals 3 and n equals 1 is the largest among these options, this transition releases the greatest amount of energy. So the correct answer is D, n equals 3 to n equals 1. Remember, the largest energy release occurs when the electron drops from any higher energy level to a very low energy level like n equals 1. Let's move on to question number 5. Question number 5. It says an electron in a hydrogen atom releases a photon with a wavelength of 528 nanometers. To which hydrogen spectral series does this transition belong? Is it the Lyman series? Is it the Balmer series? The Paschen series? Or the bracket series? Which one do you think? Here's a solution to this problem. If you picked answer choice B, you are correct. Let's figure out which hydrogen spectral series a photon of 528 nanometers belongs to. First, remember the different hydrogen series and their regions. Lyman series is in the ultraviolet, Balmer series is in the visible light range, the Paschen series is in the infrared, bracket series is in the far infrared, but you are not expected to know this series for the MCAT. It was just created here as an answer choice to distract you. Remember to stick with what you know. Now, 528 nanometers is in the visible light range. But why? Because remember, we said red light has a wavelength of about 700 nanometers and violet light has a wavelength of about 400 nanometers. Here, 528 falls right in between 400 and 700 nanometers. This is the reason why it belongs to the visible light region of the spectrum. That means this transition is part of the Balmer series, the series responsible for all the colors of the visible light spectrum. So the correct answer is B, the Balmer series. For this question, there is no need to panic. You do not need to memorize all the specific wavelengths and the frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. Remember what we discussed in this lesson. You need to know the order of the electromagnetic spectrum, and you also need to know that the red light has a wavelength of about 700 nanometers, and violet light has a wavelength of about 400 nanometers. The only information you need to answer this question is that 528 nanometers falls between the wavelengths of red and violet light. So commit these two wavelengths to memory. You don't need to remember all the exact wavelength values. Just the two I pointed out in this lecture is enough. Let's move on to question number 6. Question number 6, it says, what is the correct order of increasing wavelength in the electromagnetic spectrum? The correct answer to this question is answer choice B. When organizing the electromagnetic spectrum by increasing wavelength, we move from the shortest wavelength to the longest. That order is gamma rays, X rays, ultraviolet, visible light, infrared, and then microwaves. A helpful way to remember this is that high energy waves have shorter wavelength while lower energy waves have longer wavelength. That's why gamma rays come first and microwaves come later. Finally, remember the order of the electromagnetic spectrum using the mnemonic that we previously presented in this lecture. It will help you answer some of the questions on the MCAT correctly. So the correct answer is B. Gamma rays, X rays, UV, visible, IR, and microwave. We are now ready to move on to the next part of this lesson, an MCAT style practice passage. Before we begin, take a moment to review the key topics we covered. Remind yourself of the most important points about hydrogen and its properties, and think about any mistakes you made while working through the practice questions. Those mistakes are not failures, they're powerful learning tools. Now get yourself mentally ready for this next section. As you read the passage, stay focused on the science background information that's presented. Look for important relationships and comparisons, and pay close attention to the structure of the passage. Always analyze the passage for its main idea. If you see any graphs, figures, or tables, don't waste your time overanalyzing them. Instead, quickly read the caption and identify what the figure is showing, and then move on. You can always come back to them if a question requires it. And most importantly, remind yourself of this. You already have all the knowledge that you will need to answer every single question correctly. Let's begin. I will read the passage and the questions first, then take a few minutes to analyze the passage, make a quick map, and try to answer the questions on your own before we walk through everything together. Good luck, and let's get started. Electron paramagnetic resonance, EPR. Spectroscopy is one of the few techniques capable of detecting radicals within living cells or inside enzyme active sites. In the past, the use of unsuitable standards led to many inaccurate results. Fortunately, the development of a new standard, H at IBUT 8, has proven to be a major success. The H at IBUT 8 standard is produced by trapping a single hydrogen atom at the center of an octaisobutyl something nanocage. Figure 1. Here's figure 1. The structure of H at IBUT8. In EPR, radicals produce a sharp signal with a G factor of approximately 2. The G factor is a dimensionless numerical value that describes how strongly a particle's magnetic moment interacts with an external magnetic field. In EPR, the G factor is used to identify unpaired electrons and radicals in biological systems. The success of H at IBUT8 standard stems from its ability to remain inert across a wide range of temperatures. Its well characterized magnetic parameters over these temperature ranges, and the fact that its spectrum does not overlap with the spectra of other compounds of interest. Figure 2 shows the relationship between the G factor of H at IBUT8 and temperature. There's figure 2, and the caption says figure 2 H at IBUT8 G factor as a function of temperature measured at 9.48 gigahertz and 1 microwatts. Question number 1. A student is preparing a standard for EPR to analyze the radical responsible for type 2 diabetes. She successfully prepares the octabutyl nanocage. At the end of her preparation, she realizes that an extra hydrogen atom has escaped and entered the nanocage. How does this outcome affect the result of her experiment? Answer choice A says this outcome does not have any effect. She is able to carry out the experiment as expected. Answer choice B says the nanocage, now being heavier, has a reduced capacity to act as a standard. Answer choice C says the altered chemistry of the nanocage prevents it from behaving as a suitable standard. Answer choice D says a standard containing two hydrogen atoms at its center can act as a more efficient standard. Here is question number 2. In an experiment to create the EPR standard, a scientist observed that an electron in a hydrogen atom emitted a photon with a frequency of 5.7 times 10 to the 14 hertz. Which of the following graphs best represents this transition? Here's question number 3. In another study, it was found that a radical within an enzyme's active site exhibits the same G factor as H at IBUT8. What can be inferred about this finding? Answer choice A says this finding is implausible and the experiment should be repeated. Answer choice B says the radical is experiencing a similar electronic environment to that of the central atom in H at IBUT8. Answer choice C says the radical has an identical molecular structure to H at IBUT8 and is contained within a nanocage-like environment. Answer choice D says the radical chemically behaves like the central atom in the nanocage. Here is question number 4. In H at IBUT8, the hydrogen atom is trapped in a cage-like environment. Why does this improve H at IBUT8's usefulness as a standard for EPR? Answer choice A says hydrogen is a reactive atom, and the cage prevents fluctuations in pH experienced inside living cells or enzyme active sites. Answer choice B says it shields hydrogen atom magnetic signals used in EPR. Answer choice C says it lowers the free energy of the hydrogen atom, making it more stable. Answer choice D says it prevents hydrogen from interacting with other molecules. Here is question number 5. In the Bohr model of the hydrogen atom, which of the following electron transition leads to the smallest release of energy? And the answer choices are listed. Take a few minutes, go over the questions on your own, and then come back and see the solutions to the problem. On this slide, we're going to fully analyze the passage and create a passage map. The first paragraph does not provide many background science concepts that we have previously encountered. The main concept we may have encountered before is radicals, which are species with unpaired electrons, and this may be important to note. This paragraph introduces EPR and highlights the discovery of the new standard, which they refer to it as the H at IBUT8, which is described as a major success. So strong phrases like this are important to pay attention to. The second paragraph shows the structure of the standard and gives more detail about what it is. We are already familiar with the hydrogen atom, which is mentioned here in the second paragraph, so we can note it and remind ourselves that we may encounter one or two questions about it. There is no need to fully analyze the detailed structure of the standard at this point. Just acknowledge that it exists and move forward. We can return to it later if it's needed. In the third paragraph, the passage introduces the concept of the G factor and it explains what it represents. This is new information. Here they say that the G factor is used to detect radicals and other species with unpaired electrons. In paragraph 4, the author explains why the standard is considered a major success and they introduce the figure. The main idea of the passage is that H at IBUT8, which was the standard they used, is an effective EPR standard and that it is an ideal for detecting radicals and unpaired species inside living cells. Let's move on to the questions and see how we can answer those questions together. So here's question number 1. It read, a student is preparing a standard for EPR to analyze the radical responsible for type 2 diabetes. She successfully prepares the octoisobutyl nanocage. At the end of her preparation, she realizes that an extra hydrogen atom has escaped and entered the nanocage. How does this outcome affect the result of her experiment? If you picked answer choice C, you are correct. Let's see why. You should know that when the MCAT presents a student's experimental work, in most cases something can go wrong in one or more parts of the experiment. So always be on the lookout for that. Now, what is this question really asking us? It's asking what happens to the effectiveness of the standard if 2 hydrogen atoms are placed inside the nanocage instead of only one. The student was trying to prepare the standard for EPR, which is designed to work by trapping a single hydrogen atom inside the nanocage. That single hydrogen gives the standard very precise and predictable magnetic behavior. A single hydrogen atom acts as a paramagnetic species because it contains one unpaired electron. In this problem, an extra hydrogen atom accidentally enters the nanocage. This changes both the chemistry and the magnetic properties of the standards. When 2 hydrogen atoms are forced into close proximity, they can interact and form H2 molecule, which has paired electron and is no longer paramagnetic. And because of that change, the molecule can no longer behave as a proper EPR standard. That's the reason why the correct answer is answer choice C. The altered chemistry of the nanocage prevents it from behaving as a suitable standard. The key idea is that even very small changes in atomic structure can completely change how a molecule behaves in spectroscopy. If this question felt a little tricky to you, remember what we discussed earlier. First, figure out exactly what the question is asking, then connect it to your background science knowledge or the information presented in the passage. Keep that mindset, and you can handle any question the MCAT throws at you. Now, let's move on to question number 2 and see how we can solve that question. Question number 2 read, in an experiment to create the EPR standard, a scientist observed that an electron in the hydrogen atom emitted a photon with a frequency of 5.7 times 10 to the 14 hertz. Which of the following graphs best represents this transition? The correct answer to question number 2 is B, and let's see why. Let's solve this step by step. We're given the frequency of a photon as 5.7 times 10 to the 14 hertz, and we are asked to find which graph best represents this emission. We can round 5.7 times 10 to the 14 to the nearest whole number to give us 6 times 10 to the 14. We use the equation or speed of light is equal to frequency times lambda or wavelength. When we rearrange this equation, we get wavelength equals the speed of light divided by frequency. We plug in the values. The speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 18 meters per second, and the frequency is 5.7 times 10 to the 14 per second, or in unit hertz. When we round 5.7 to the nearest whole number, we get 6 times 10 to the 14. When we divide the speed of light, which is 3 times 10 to the 8, by the frequency of about 6 times 10 to the 14, we get a wavelength of about 0.5 times 10 to the negative 6 meters. And this value is about 5 times 10 to the minus 7 meters. 1 nanometer is about 1 times 10 to the minus 9 meters. When converting meters to nanometers, we get about 500 nanometers for wavelength. Now we compare the values to the graph options. The correct graph is the one with a peak at about 500 nanometers. The y-axis on the graph tells us the intensity, and the x-axis tells us wavelength in nanometers. So we need to pick the graph that has a peak around 500 nanometers, which matches answer choice B. Answer choice B shows a graph that peaks a little over 500 nanometers, which is completely fine because we rounded our value and we should expect to get an answer that is a little different from our calculations. So this is completely normal for the MCAT. That means the correct answer is option B. Remember, on the MCAT, it's completely okay to round your values to the nearest whole number. You're not expected to get perfect exact numbers, and that's completely fine. Approximate values are usually all you need. When you see a question like this, the first thing you should do is figure out what the question is really asking you. Sometimes it helps to quickly look at the answer choices because they can guide you toward where the answer is likely coming from. You can treat this type of question like a discrete MCAT question. Before doing any calculations, scan the answer options, decide on your next step, and do like some simple math. And then at the end, just match your result to the correct answer choice. Now, let's move on to question number 3. Question number 3 read in another study, it was found that a radical within an enzyme's active site exhibits the same G factor as H at IBU-T8. What can be inferred from this finding? Let's break this question down together. What is this question really asking us? It is asking us to determine what the G factor represents. We are told in the passage that the G factor describes how strongly a particle's magnetic moment interacts with a magnetic field, and that this value is used to identify unpaired electrons and radical species. We are told in the question stem that a radical inside an enzyme's active site shows the same G factor as the standard. The key thing to remember is that in EPR spectroscopy, the G factor reflects the electronic and magnetic environment of an unpaired electron. So if two species have the same G factor, that tells us their unpaired electrons are experiencing very similar electronic environments, not that they have the same structure or chemistry. That's why the correct answer is answer choice B. The radical is experiencing the same type of electronic environment as the central atom in H at IBUTA or the standard. The other answer choices go too far by claiming identical structures or chemical behavior, which the G factor alone cannot prove. So the correct answer to question number 3 is answer choice B. Here's question number 4. It says in H at IBU-T8, the hydrogen atom is trapped in a cage-like environment. Why does this improve the standard's usefulness as a standard for EPR? So again, what is this question really asking us? It's asking why the nanocage makes hydrogen more effective as a standard for EPR. The correct answer is D. It prevents hydrogen from interacting with other molecules. But why? Because in EPR, we need a signal that is stable and reproducible. By isolating the hydrogen atom, the cage keeps its magnetic properties consistent no matter what's happening in its surrounding environment. The passage specifically states that the standard success comes from its ability to remain inert across a wide range of temperatures, its well characterized magnetic parameters, and the fact that its spectrum does not overlap with other compounds. Since hydrogen atom is highly reactive, On its own, since it only has one electron, the cage prevents it from interacting with other atoms, which ensures a clean EPR signal. Now, let's look at why the other options are not correct. A says the cage prevents pH fluctuations. This is not mentioned in the passage, so it acts as a distraction. B says it shields hydrogen from magnetic signals. That would prevent detection, defeating the purpose of EPR. Answer choice C says it lowers the free energy of the hydrogen. The passage does not mention anything about the stability of hydrogen. So remember, the standard works because it keeps the hydrogen isolated, giving a consistent, reliable signal every time. The correct answer to number 4 is answer choice D. Let's move on to question number 5. Question number 5 says in the Bohr model of the hydrogen atom, which of the following electronic transitions leads to the smallest release of energy? Let's break this question down together using the hydrogen energy level diagram presented earlier. In the Bohr model, the energy levels are not evenly spaced. The energy gaps are larger when the levels are closer to the nucleus, and the spacing becomes smaller and smaller as the energy levels increase. Now, here's a key MCAT rule you must remember. The closer the energy levels are, the smaller the amount of energy released when an electron transitions between energy levels. Let's quickly check the answer choices. Transitions like n equals 2 to n equals 1 and n equals 3 to n equals 1 involve large drops in energy because these levels are far apart in terms of energy and are closer to the nucleus. The n equals 5 to n equals 2 transition still releases a moderate amount of energy. But now look at n equals infinity to n equals 9. At very high energy levels, the lines are very tightly packed together. This means the electron moves a very small energy distance between levels and it releases the least amount of energy. So the correct answer is answer choice D. N equals infinity to n equals 9 transition. On the MCAT, always remember transitions between higher energy levels release the least amount of energy. This wraps up today's video. Great job for making it this far. That already tells me you're very dedicated. Remember, the MCAT is a marathon, it's not a sprint. You don't get a great score overnight. You earn it through consistent effort, smart practice, and believing in yourself, even when it feels hard. And here's the most important part. A great MCAT score is within your reach. You're already capable of more than you think, and every single time you practice, you're getting closer to your goal. So keep going, stay consistent, and trust the process. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck on your MCAT journey. You've got this.